Segregation is the practice of restricting certain people to specific circumscribed areas of residence or to separate institutions and facilities. In other words, it is separation based on race. Segregation is now considered a violation of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment declares that all citizens receive equal protection under the Constitution. Segregation in many cases was unequal, especially for African Americans. The roots to segregation started with slavery. Slavery first began in America when the European settlers came. Many trade merchants would sell goods for African slaves, and then sell the slaves to the Americas for goods. A major court case of this time was Dred Scott v. Sandford. Scott was a slave that ran away from his owner to a free state. His owner, who found him, took him back to his original state and once again into slavery. Scott sued for freedom, arguing that he made it past the border of slave states. After appealing to the Supreme Court, the results were a 7-2 decision in favor of Sandford, Scott's owner. The impact of this case is that born slaves will always be considered slaves regardless of the state they reside in. Generally in this time period, blacks had no rights in America and were considered to be objects more than actual people. The Emancipation Proclamation was written in 1863 and started the movement of immediate citizenship for African Americans. The passing of these rights ended in 1865 with the passing of the 15th Amendment. The proclamation ended slavery in all Confederate states. This was later finalized with the 13th Amendment, which freed all slaves. Amendments 14 and 15 soon followed. The 14th Amendment says that all persons born inside the U.S. boundaries are considered its citizens. This means that all former slaves are now citizens of the U.S. The 15th Amendment states that no citizen shall be denied voting rights. This change occurred because Lincoln believed in freedom for slaves and saw the Civil War as an opportunity to finally bring some form of justice to the black community. This made the Civil War a fight for freedom. The overall change in this time period is that slaves were now free. Although African Americans were now considered citizens, the southern states did their best to restrict those freedoms. Black codes were enforced to limit African Americans' rights. These laws began in the late 1800s and were different in each state, but generally did 6 things. First, they defined the term person of color. Second, they prevented blacks from voting, holding office, or serving on juries. Third, they prevented blacks from serving in state militias. Fourth, they mandated for poor, unemployed persons, usually blacks, to be arrested for vagrancy or bound as apprentices. Fifth, they mandated and regulated labor contracts between whites and free blacks. Sixth, they prohibited interracial marriages between whites and blacks. Plessy v. Ferguson was an important court case during this time. In it, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was lawful if it was equal. In these times, African Americans were freed. However, laws had been made to restrict those freedoms. The first court case in the Supreme Court that was a turning point in the rights of blacks was Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka in 1953. In this case, African American students were denied entry to a white public school. This case challenges the constitutionality of segregation in schools. In many schools, education is not equal. The decision made by the court was that even though all public schools could be viewed as fair, denying blacks and minorities could be harmful and a sign of inferiority. There are many people who have faced persecution to fight the injustices of segregation. These are just a few groups and individuals that have made a huge impact on segregation today.